when it was supposed to be a night of laughter, love, and the promise of a new chapter. At exactly midnight on June 25, 2023, 28-year-old Jassity Strong raised a shot glass to her phone screen, toasting her birthday with her mother over FaceTime. "Happy birthday to me," she laughed, her smile glowing with anticipation. She had so much to celebrate: a thriving career as a makeup artist, her certification as a nursing assistant, and most importantly, the joy of being the devoted mother of two beautiful children. The future stretched ahead of her like an open road, full of possibility. But less than 5 hours later, that same young mother would be lying dead in a Kansas City street, her blood mixing with the asphalt where shell casings scattered. Like deadly confetti, 3 people would be killed, 6 wounded, over 50 shots fired, all because of something so simple, so seemingly harmless, that most of us wouldn't believe it could spark a massacre. A hug. But what kind of hug leads to 3 deaths? Who was the killer walking free just 48 hours before this tragedy? And why did the justice system fail so catastrophically that a birthday celebration became a crime scene? To understand the weight of what was lost that night, you have to know who Jassity really was. She was not just another name in a headline. She was a woman who had overcome tremendous odds to build something beautiful out of a childhood filled with challenges. Born in 1995 in Kansas City, Missouri, she came into a world where the deck was already stacked against her. Her mother, Tamika Jenkins, was barely 15 when she had her first baby. "We grew up together," Tamika would later say, and those words carried more weight than most people realize. 2 children really, a mother and her daughter, learning life's hardest lessons side by side. The early years were marked by instability and heartbreak. Jassity's biological father was taken from her through violence before she could even form lasting memories of him. That loss, experiencing the brutal reality of street violence before she could understand it, would shape her entire approach to life. She spent long stretches of time with her aunts while her mother tried to finish school, weaving her childhood into a network of family bonds that stretched across Kansas City. When William Jenkins entered their lives as her stepfather, everything changed. He provided stability, becoming the father figure she desperately needed. But by then, Jassity had already developed something that would define her forever: an unshakable determination to protect the people she loved. As the eldest of 5 siblings, she naturally fell into the role of second mother. Not because anyone asked her to, but because it was who she was at her core. While other teenagers were worried about fitting in at school or choosing the right outfit for a dance, Jassity was making sure her younger brothers and sisters had what they needed. Her family called her Jass, and that nickname became synonymous with reliability. If someone needed help, financial, emotional, or otherwise, they called Jass. She never hesitated. Everyone who knew her described her the same way: bubbly, forgiving, happy-go-lucky. But those words, as warm as they sound, don't capture the depth of her character. Conversations with her felt like therapy, friends would say, except she never made you feel judged or broken. She had a way of making everyone believe they were the most important person in the room. Despite her responsibilities, Jassity refused to let her dreams die. She pushed forward with determination, completing her certified nursing assistant training. Her motivation went far beyond just needing a job. Her grandmother's treatment in healthcare facilities had opened her eyes to the reality of how the elderly were often dismissed, overlooked, or treated without dignity. Working with patients became more than employment. It was a mission. She would stay late to comfort residents who didn't get visitors. She learned their favorite songs and hummed them during difficult procedures. Colleagues described her as the most dedicated and caring member of their team. But she wasn't stopping at being a CNA. Her ultimate goal was to become a registered nurse. She had already begun researching programs and saving money for tuition. This wasn't just workplace ambition. It was her way of transforming her own childhood trauma into something that could help others. By his teenage years, the warning signs were impossible to ignore. Teachers reported aggressive outbursts over minor disagreements. He couldn't keep friendships. His temper ignited easily, leaving chaos behind. School became a battlefield, and eventually he dropped out. Programs designed to catch kids like him and redirect them couldn't keep him on track. He rejected them all. By adulthood, he cycled through jobs in construction, fast food, and warehouses. And none lasted. Supervisors described the same issues every time: anger, conflict, and inability to accept authority. Each firing reinforced his belief that the world was against him. His first major clash with the law came in January 2019. Police arrested him for unlawful possession of a weapon. At just 22 years old, he was already carrying firearms illegally. Alongside the weapons charge came multiple drug charges. This wasn't youthful experimentation. This was dealing. The pattern began to form. Each arrest more serious. Each appearance before a judge a reminder of a system unable to stop him. His criminal record grew heavier with each passing year. By May 2022, his behavior had escalated into controlled substance charges. By the summer of 2023, the red flags were everywhere. He wasn't just a man on the wrong side of the law. He was a man spiraling, a danger waiting for his next eruption, and yet the system released him. Just 2 days before Jassity's birthday, Greene walked free on bond. He should never have been there that night. Never had the chance to put a gun in his hand and rage in his heart. But the failures stacked up, and the consequences fell on innocent lives. Inside the club in the early hours of June 25th, the mood was celebratory. The music pounded, neon lights painted the room in color, and friends laughed and toasted. Jassity was radiant, surrounded by people she trusted. But in the crowd, Greene simmered. Witnesses would later describe the moment the night shattered. Two men embraced in a casual hug. Something so small, so meaningless to most. But to Greene it was a spark. His eyes darkened, his face hardened. To him it was disrespect. To him it was an insult that demanded blood. His hand went to the weapon he should never have had. At 2:17 a.m., the music stopped under the deafening sound of rapid gunfire. More than 50 shots exploded into the air, echoing through the club. Screams replaced laughter. People dove to the ground. Overturned tables, pushed through doors. Desperate to escape, Jassity was hit. The woman who had survived so much, who had built so much, who had celebrated her birthday just hours before, collapsed in the chaos. The man whose name would later dominate the headlines of Kansas City was Keivon Greene, a 23-year-old, whose story was already written. In broken lines long before the night of June 25th, 2023, to understand how he came to shatter so many lives, we need to go back and examine the path that brought him there. AWOL. Path littered with missed chances, red flags ignored, and a justice system that opened the door wide for the horror that was to come. Greene grew up in instability. Friends from his teenage years recall a young man who seemed constantly on edge, quick to anger, and deeply distrustful of authority. He gravitated toward the streets at a young age, finding in them the structure and loyalty he did not seem to find at home. By the time most of his peers were preparing for college or the military, Greene was already running with older men who carried guns like wallets and spoke the language of intimidation and quick money. It wasn't long before he picked up those same habits himself. His criminal record began stacking up before he even turned 20. Drug charges, unlawful use of weapons, resisting arrest, each incident painting the picture of someone who was not only spiraling, but growing more emboldened. With every encounter with the law, courtrooms became familiar places for him, his name appearing again and again in dockets. Judges issued warnings. Probation officers attempted supervision. Yet at each step, Greene seemed to slip through the cracks, sometimes with a slap on the wrist, sometimes with brief stints behind bars, only to be released back into the very same environment that had shaped him. It wasn't just that he was committing crimes. It was the escalation. Each arrest seemed to mark not a step toward accountability, but rather a training ground for something worse. People who knew him said he had a hair-trigger temper, a dangerous combination when paired with firearms and a sense of invincibility fostered by repeated releases. In May of 2022, Greene was arrested again, this time on serious charges. He was booked on counts related to unlawful use of a weapon, drug possession, and resisting arrest. The arrest itself had been violent, with officers reporting he attempted to flee, resisted handcuffs, and was carrying a firearm despite being legally barred from owning one. Prosecutors moved forward with charges, and for a moment, it seemed as though Greene's path might finally intersect with true accountability. But that's not how the story unfolded. Greene's court dates came and went, often delayed, sometimes dismissed, sometimes negotiated down. Plea deals floated in the air. Bond hearings were scheduled, and somehow, despite the severity of the charges, Greene found himself back on the streets. Each time he was granted bond, it was as if the system was gambling on the hope that this time, perhaps he would stay out of trouble. Each time that gamble failed. It's important to stop here and reflect, because what we are talking about isn't just the story of one man's poor decisions. It is the story of a system that had multiple opportunities to intervene and did not. Greene's history was not hidden. His escalating violence was documented. His disregard for law and order was evident. Yet still decisions were made to release him, to give him another chance, to hope that maybe he would do better next time. But Greene wasn't doing better. He was getting worse. And in June of 2023, just 48 hours before the massacre, the system made its most fatal mistake yet. He was released from jail, once again on bond, despite the clear risks he posed to the community. 2 days later, he would walk into a Kansas City nightclub carrying the same rage, the same guns, and the same disregard for human life that had defined his short, violent adulthood. And there he would unleash it in a way that no one present could ever forget. On June 25, 2023, the stage was already set. Jassity Strong, full of joy from celebrating her birthday, was out with friends at the after-hours club near 57th Street and Prospect Avenue. The air was thick with summer humidity, the music pumping, the energy high. Greene was also there, weaving through the crowd, his presence unnoticed by most, but soon to dominate everyone's memory. To some he seemed agitated, restless, moving with the kind of jittery paranoia that often precedes violence. He had no real business being there, but Greene was the kind of man who thrived on tension, on watching others, on waiting for an excuse to strike. He found it, tragically, in a moment so ordinary it could have passed without incident 100 times over. But that night it would cost lives. Witnesses later recalled a heated exchange between Greene and another man. At first it seemed like a normal argument, the kind of clash that flares up in crowded rooms where alcohol, music, and pride mix in dangerous ways. Words were exchanged, voices rose, and then, as if to diffuse the situation, the other man reached out to embrace Greene in a hug, a gesture meant to cool tempers. But Greene didn't see it as peace. He saw it as disrespect, as weakness, as an opportunity to reassert dominance in the only way he knew how. And that's when everything changed. Greene pulled a gun and opened fire. The sound of the first shots shattered the room, sending bodies diving for cover and screams piercing the night. What began as a birthday celebration turned into a war zone in an instant. The details of those next few minutes are chaotic, almost impossible to piece together in perfect order. Because of the sheer panic and terror that gripped the club, over 50 shots were fired, bullets tearing through walls, shattering glass, ripping into bodies. People trampled over one another in the desperate rush to escape. The music cut off, replaced by the deafening echo of gunfire and the cries of the wounded. Greene wasn't firing in one direction. He was spraying the room, indiscriminately, ensuring that his rage landed on as many victims as possible. Outside, the night erupted with chaos as survivors stumbled into the street. Some bleeding, some screaming for help, others in shock, unable to process the nightmare unfolding around them. When the shooting finally stopped, 3 people lay dead. Among them was Jassity Strong. Her life cut short just hours after she had shared laughter and love with her family. 6 others were injured, some critically, their bodies bearing the marks of Greene's violence. Their lives forever changed in seconds. Police rushed to the scene, sirens wailing, lights flashing against the club's facade. Officers stepped into a scene of devastation, shell casings littering the ground, bodies motionless, survivors hysterical. It was a scene that would haunt even the most seasoned officers, a grim reminder of how quickly joy can turn to tragedy when the wrong man is given freedom he should never have had. For Greene, there was no escape. Witnesses identified him. Surveillance cameras caught his movements. The case against him was clear from the start. He was arrested and charged with multiple counts of second-degree murder, armed criminal action, and unlawful use of a weapon. Prosecutors moved swiftly, ensuring this time there would be no bond, no second chance, no more gambling with the lives of innocent people. Greene sat in a jail cell as families of his victims began the painful process of grieving, of burying their loved ones, of grappling with the senselessness of it all. And at the center of their grief was a single, unanswerable question. Why was he free in the first place? Why had the warnings not been enough? Why did it take 3 lives for the system to finally say, enough? The death of Jassity Strong was not just a tragedy for her family. It was a wake-up call for an entire community. Her mother, Tamika, devastated and broken, spoke of her daughter's dreams, of the light she brought into every room, of the children now left without their mother. Her voice carried the weight of every parent's worst nightmare, but also the fury of someone who knew this didn't have to happen. And she was right. This was preventable. This was not fate. This was failure. Human failure, systemic failure, repeated and compounded until it culminated in the ultimate price. Greene's story is one of violence, yes, but it is also a mirror reflecting a larger issue. A cycle of crime and release, of ignoring the obvious, of hoping for change that never came. For Kansas City, June 25th became more than a date. It became a scar, a reminder of the cost of inaction. Community leaders demanded reform. Residents spoke out, furious at a justice system that had gambled with their safety and lost. Politicians promised change. Investigations were launched, and Greene's name was cemented in infamy. But for the families, no investigation, no reform. No promise could bring back Jassity. No legal proceeding could fill the silence left in her children's lives. That silence, that emptiness, is the true cost of what happened. And it is a cost they will carry forever. 7. The first bullet cracked the air like a whip, splitting the atmosphere inside the club and silencing laughter in an instant. In the confusion of flashing lights, pounding bass and swaying bodies, it took a heartbeat for people to register what was happening. Then came the second shot, the third, and soon a relentless cascade that sent shockwaves through the building. Screams erupted, piercing through the smoke of the DJ's machine, and the crowd surged, bodies colliding in desperate attempts to flee. Greene's hand was steady as he sprayed bullets indiscriminately into the room, his face twisted with rage. To some witnesses, it looked almost mechanical, as though he had been waiting his whole life for this moment of dominance. To others, it was pure madness, a man with no control, letting his fury consume anyone within range. Whatever it was lethal. People dropped to the floor, some diving under tables, others clinging to strangers in the hope that hiding would keep them safe. The sound of gunfire echoed off the walls, disorienting, impossible to tell which direction it was coming from. Glass shattered, bottles exploded. The once lively club transformed into a war zone. In the frenzy, Jassity Strong was caught in the crossfire. Just hours earlier, she had been full of life, her laughter filling her mother's phone screen. Now in the chaos, she collapsed to the ground as those around her screamed her name, unable to comprehend that in seconds the bright light of her life had been extinguished. Outside, people poured into the streets, many of them bleeding, some dragging friends or strangers, others stumbling in shock. One young woman clutched her leg, blood soaking her jeans as she screamed for help. Another man held his chest, eyes wide, his breath shallow and desperate. Others crouched behind cars, calling family members in frantic voices. There's been a shooting. I don't know if I'm going to make it out. The neighborhood, already accustomed to violence, found itself once again at the epicenter of tragedy. Neighbors woke to the sound of sirens, the wailing cries of survivors, mixing with the flashing blue and red lights that bathed the streets in a sickening glow. 8 inside the aftermath was catastrophic. Shell casings littered the floor, over 50 in total, each one representing a moment of terror, a fraction of a second where a decision to shoot had shattered another life. The music had long since stopped, replaced by the desperate moans of the wounded and the cries of those who realized their friends weren't getting up. A man lay motionless near the dance floor, blood pooling beneath him. Another victim slumped against the wall, eyes closed, his phone buzzing in his pocket with calls that would never be answered. Amid it all, Jassity lay still, her friends screaming her name, shaking her body as if trying to will her back to life. The first officers, to arrive later, admitted it was one of the worst scenes they had ever encountered. Kansas City police were no strangers to shootings, but this was something different. It wasn't a targeted hit or a drive-by with a single victim. This was a massacre. The scale of the violence was overwhelming. The sheer randomness of the shooting leaving even seasoned officers shaken. They moved quickly, securing the perimeter, shouting commands to terrified survivors, checking bodies for signs of life. Medics rushed in behind them, navigating the maze of overturned chairs, broken glass and blood-streaked floors. They worked frantically, applying tourniquets, performing CPR, trying desperately to pull victims back from the brink. Some they saved, others, like Jassity, were already gone. Word of the shooting spread quickly. Within minutes, social media was flooded with shaky videos from outside the club, the sound of gunshots echoing in the background. People screaming as they ran. Posts went up with messages like, "Pray for KC and I can't believe this is happening. Family." Members raced to the scene, some desperate for news, others clinging to the hope that the names of their loved ones wouldn't be among the dead. For Tamika, the mother who had just FaceTimed her daughter hours earlier, the call that came was one no parent should ever have to receive. Her baby, her firstborn, her joy, had been shot and killed in a senseless act of violence. The weight of that reality crushed her. In interviews later, her voice trembled as she described her pain, the disbelief that the same girl she had, spoken to with laughter, in her voice was now lying cold in a morgue. 9 survivors. Later spoke of the haunting images that would never leave their minds. One woman recalled lying flat on the floor, her cheek pressed against sticky beer, hearing the bullets whiz past her head and praying she wouldn't be hit. Another described the silence that followed after the gunfire stopped, a silence broken only by sobs and the ringing in her ears. "It felt like forever," she said. "Like we were trapped in a nightmare we couldn't wake up from." A man who had been shot in the arm recounted how he crawled out of the building, dragging another man with a chest wound, unsure if either of them would survive. These testimonies painted a vivid picture of the terror Greene had unleashed, the scars he left not just on bodies but on minds and hearts. As dawn broke over Kansas City, the magnitude of the tragedy became clearer. News crews descended on the scene, broadcasting live from outside the club as investigators combed through evidence. Yellow tape cordoned off the block, marking the site of one of the deadliest mass shootings the city had seen in years. Reporters spoke of the 3 lives lost, the 6 injured, and the countless others forever traumatized. The names of the victims began to surface, each one representing not just a statistic, but a life cut short. Dreams unfulfilled, families shattered, and at the center of the coverage was Jassity Strong, her bright smile appearing in photos on screens across the city, a stark contrast to the horror of how her life had ended. The community's grief quickly turned to anger as details emerged about Greene's history. People learned he had been released just 2 days earlier on bond, despite a violent record that should have kept him behind bars. The outrage was palpable. Residents asked the same questions over and over. How could this happen? Why was he free? Why did it take more lives being lost before the system acted? At vigils held in Jassity's honor, candles flickered in the night as family, friends and strangers gathered to mourn. They shared stories of her kindness, her ambition, her love for her children. They cried together, held hands, and vowed that her death would not be in vain. For the families of the other victims, the pain was equally unbearable. Each life lost represented a unique story, a unique hole in the fabric of the community. One family described their son as a protector, someone who always looked out for his siblings. Another spoke of their daughter's dreams of becoming a teacher. Each testimony added to the weight of the tragedy, the understanding that Greene's bullets had not just ended lives but stolen futures. Survivors wrestled with guilt, asking themselves why they had lived when others had not, replaying the night in their minds, searching for meaning in the meaningless. 10 police and prosecutors, too, faced the harsh reality of what had transpired. Greene was quickly taken into custody, charged with 3 counts of second-degree murder, along with multiple counts of armed criminal action and unlawful use of a weapon. Prosecutors announced he would be held without bond, a small comfort to a community still reeling. But for many it was too little, too late. The system had already failed them once. Promises of accountability rang hollow in the ears of those who had buried their loved ones. Trust in the system, already fragile, was now broken. As the days turned into weeks, the weight of the shooting lingered. Families tried to pick up the pieces. Planning funerals, comforting children, facing the harsh reality of life without their loved ones. For Tamika, the loss of Jassity was unbearable. She spoke often of her daughter's love for her kids, how she would have done anything for them. Now those children faced a future without their mother, their lives forever altered by Greene's violence and the system's failure. She didn't deserve this, Tamika said through tears, her words echoing the sentiment of an entire community. None of them did. And yet, in the midst of the grief, there was also resilience. Kansas City came together, neighbors supporting one another, strangers donating to help with funeral expenses, community leaders demanding change. Vigils turned into rallies, candles into calls for justice. The names of the victims were spoken with reverence, their memories honored with action. People vowed to fight for reforms, to ensure that those with violent pasts could not slip so easily through the cracks again. Whether those promises would lead to real change remained to be seen. But one thing was certain: the lives lost on June 25, 2023, would never be forgotten. In the weeks that followed the massacre, Kansas City found itself suspended between grief and outrage. Funeral processions wound their way through the streets, lines of cars stretching for blocks as mourners came to pay their respects. At each service, the weight of loss was palpable. Mothers clutched photographs, fathers fought back tears, children asked questions no one could answer. For Jassity Strong's family, the heartbreak was indescribable. Her mother, Tamika, stood before a crowd of mourners, her voice cracking as she spoke of her daughter's warmth, her ambition, her fierce love for her children. "She was my first," Tamika said, clutching the microphone with trembling hands. "We grew up together. I wasn't supposed to bury her." The crowd wept with her, their tears a testament to the hole left in the fabric of their community. Her children, too young to fully understand the permanence of death, asked when their mother was coming home. Family members struggled to find words, telling them that mommy was in heaven, that she was watching over them, that her love would never fade. But behind those reassurances was the devastating truth. Birthdays, graduations, first days of school, all would come and go without Jassity there to celebrate. Tamika promised to raise them with the same strength and determination her daughter had shown, but she admitted privately that the weight sometimes felt unbearable. How do you explain to a child that the person they love most in the world is gone forever? She asked quietly to a reporter. How do you make sense of something that makes no sense at all? The broader community echoed that same anguish. Vigils turned into rallies, rallies into public outcries for change. Local leaders demanded accountability, not just for Greene, but for the system that had allowed him to be free. Greene's release on bond, just days before the shooting, became the focal point of public anger. Court documents showed a long history of violence, of repeated chances, of red flags ignored. Residents asked why a man with such a record had been given yet another opportunity to walk the streets. This was preventable, one community activist declared. The system failed Jassity. It failed all of us. Keivon Greene himself showed little remorse in the days following his arrest. Reports from the courthouse described him as cold, detached, eyes scanning the room without expression. Prosecutors wasted no time in stacking the charges against him. 3 counts of second-degree murder, multiple counts of armed criminal action, and unlawful possession of a firearm. They argued for him to be held without bond, citing his violent history and the sheer scale of the crime. The judge agreed, ensuring Greene would remain behind bars as the case made its way through the legal system. For many, it was a hollow victory. The damage had already been done, and no amount of legal proceedings could bring back the lives lost. Yet the trial loomed large in the minds of survivors and families. They needed justice, a public acknowledgement of the pain inflicted, a confirmation that Greene's actions would not go unanswered. Prosecutors promised to pursue the maximum penalty, but some family members admitted that no sentence could match the enormity of their loss. What's life in prison compared to a lifetime without my daughter? Tamika asked bitterly. He still gets to breathe, to wake up every day. My baby doesn't. Media coverage kept the story alive. Each headline a reminder of the city's wounds. Photos of Jassity smiling with her children were juxtaposed with mugshots of Greene, the contrast stark and painful. Opinion pieces questioned the efficacy of the bail system, pointing to the case as evidence of deep flaws. Community forums were held, where residents voiced their fears and frustrations, demanding reforms to ensure violent offenders could not so easily slip through the cracks. Lawmakers promised to review procedures, but skepticism ran high. People had heard these promises before. Real change, they knew, would take more than words. As the months passed, the pain did not fade. Survivors struggled with trauma, some unable to return to work, others plagued by nightmares and anxiety. A young man who had been shot in the leg described how every loud noise now sent him into a panic. A woman who had lost her best friend admitted she hadn't been able to step foot in a nightclub since. Therapists and community counselors offered support, but the scars ran deep. It's not just the people who were shot, one counselor noted. It's everyone who was there, everyone who knew them, everyone in the city who feels less safe now. The ripples of trauma spread far beyond that one night. 12 for Jassity's family. The hardest part was the quiet moments. Walking past her empty room, hearing her favorite song on the radio, seeing her children play and realizing she would never hold them again. Tamika spoke often of her daughter's dreams, how she had been saving to move into her own home, how she had wanted to build a life of stability for her children. She worked so hard to break cycles, to build something better, Tamika said. And in one night, it was all taken away. Her grief was compounded by anger, not just at Greene, but at the system that had allowed him to be free. We trusted that the courts would protect us. They didn't, and now my baby is gone. In the courtroom, prosecutors laid out a chilling timeline of Greene's actions. They spoke of his long history of arrests, his violent temper, his inability to hold jobs or relationships without conflict. They pointed to the sheer number of shots fired as evidence of his intent to cause maximum harm. Defense attorneys argued that Greene had acted in the heat of the moment, that his troubled upbringing had shaped his behavior. But for families, such arguments rang hollow. Nothing could excuse the carnage he had unleashed. The trial became not just about Greene's guilt, but about the failures that had led to that night. Each day in court reopened wounds, forcing survivors and families to relive their trauma. Yet they endured, determined to see justice served. Outside the courthouse, activists held signs demanding bail reform, chanting slogans about accountability and safety. News cameras captured their voices, amplifying the message that Jassity's death should not be in vain. Whether those calls would lead to lasting change remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: the community was no longer willing to remain silent. As the trial drew to a close, the jury's verdict seemed inevitable. Greene was found guilty on all counts, his fate sealed. The sentencing would determine how many years he would spend behind bars. But for many, the verdict itself was a small measure of closure. Still, as Tamika left the courthouse, she made it clear that no verdict could truly heal her loss. Justice doesn't bring her back, she said softly. But at least now the world knows what he did, and he can't hurt anyone else. 13. In the months that followed, Kansas City continued to grapple with the aftermath. Murals were painted in honor of the victims, their faces immortalized on brick walls as reminders of the lives stolen. Community programs were launched in their names, scholarships established to carry forward their dreams. Jassity's makeup artistry inspired a local initiative to support young women pursuing careers in beauty and healthcare, a way of keeping her spirit alive. Her children grew under the care of family, surrounded by love but forever missing the presence of the woman who had given them life. The story of June 25, 2023, remained etched in the city's memory. It became a cautionary tale, a symbol of systemic failure, a rallying cry for change. For those who loved Jassity, it was also a daily reminder of the fragility of life, the randomness of violence, and the importance of cherishing every moment. If you take anything from this story, Tamika said at a memorial service 1 year later, Let it be this: love your people while you have them. Tell them every day, because tomorrow is never promised. And that is the haunting truth of this tragedy. A young mother full of dreams, a community celebrating life, a city with so much to lose, all brought down by a man who never should have been free. It's a story of love, loss, and systemic failure, one that forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the world we live in. How many more lives will be lost before change comes? How many more families will have to bury their loved ones before the system truly learns from its mistakes? These are questions that demand answers, not just in Kansas City, but across America. As we close this story, take a moment to reflect. Think about the people in your life, the ones you love, the ones who depend on you. Hold them close, because in the end, none of us know how much time we have. And for Jassity Strong, time ran out far too soon. May her memory inspire us to demand better, to fight for justice, and to live with the kind of love and determination she embodied every day of her short but powerful life. If this story moved you, if you believe her legacy deserves to be remembered, make sure you subscribe so you never miss these stories. Share this video so others can understand the cost of systemic failures. And please take a moment to leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your prayers, or your own experiences with loss and resilience. To everyone watching, I pray for your safety. May you and your loved ones be protected from harm. May your homes be filled with peace, and may tragedies like this remind us not just of what we've lost, but of what we must fight to protect.